I never thought my mother would choose a man she'd known for 6 months over her own daughter. But life has a way of shattering expectations, especially on rainy Tuesday afternoons. You need to find somewhere else to live, Sophie. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes as she delivered this bombshell, instead focusing on folding napkins for dinner. Dinner with Gerald, her new husband, who was moving in tomorrow. What? I set down my coffee mug, certain I'd misheard. This is my home. It's my home, she corrected, her fingers creasing the fabric with practiced precision. And now it's Gerald's home, too. He has 3 children, Sophie. They need the space. I stared at her, this woman who suddenly seemed like a stranger. My father had been dead for just 18 months. The house we lived in, the only home I'd known for my 24 years, had been his pride and joy. He'd renovated every inch of it himself, teaching me how to sand floors and patch drywall along the way. His children are adults, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. They don't even live with him. They visit, and we need privacy. Mom finally looked up, her expression a mixture of resolve and guilt. You have a good job now. It's time you found your own place. The good job she referred to was my position as an architectural assistant, a job I'd taken locally despite offers in other cities, specifically so I could stay close after Dad died, so she wouldn't be alone. Where exactly am I supposed to go? On 3 days' notice? The unfairness of it burned in my throat. You could stay with Leah until you find an apartment. She referenced my best friend as casually as if we were discussing weekend plans. I've already boxed most of your things. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. You packed my stuff? Without asking me? Gerald's movers are coming tomorrow morning. Her tone was apologetic but firm. I knew you'd be upset, so I thought I'd make it easier. As if evicting me from my childhood home could ever be easy. Dad would never have done this. The words escaped before I could stop them. Mom's face hardened. Your father isn't here anymore, Sophie. I am. And I'm finally living for myself after spending 26 years being just someone's wife and someone's mother. The casual cruelty of her dismissal, of our family, of our history in this house, stole my breath. I'd supported her dating again, had encouraged her to find happiness after the fog of grief. I'd even tried to like Gerald, despite his condescending comments and the way he treated Mom like a shiny new possession. But this? This felt like betrayal on a level I couldn't process. Can't believe you're doing this. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I'm sorry it's sudden, but Gerald's lease ended unexpectedly early. His landlord needs the house back. She resumed folding napkins, signaling the conversation was ending. You'll understand someday when you're in a relationship. Compromises have to be made. Compromises. Is that what she called throwing her daughter out for a man she barely knew? I left the kitchen in a daze, climbing the stairs to my bedroom, or what had been my bedroom. The door was open, revealing stacked moving boxes labeled in Mom's neat handwriting. Sophie, clothes. Sophie, books. Sophie, keepsakes. My life, neatly categorized and ready for removal. The room felt foreign now, stripped of the posters and photos that had covered the walls. My architectural drawings, normally spread across the desk, had been rolled and secured with rubber bands. Everything that made this space mine had been systematically erased. I sank onto the bare mattress, trying to absorb the reality of my situation. I needed to call Leah to see if her offer of her couch still stood from when she'd suggested I get out more last month. I needed to figure out what to do with my things, where to go, how to afford a security deposit on an apartment with my entry-level salary, but underneath the practical concerns lay a deeper wound. My mother had chosen Gerald over me, had prioritized his comfort over my stability. The woman who'd held me through nightmares and heartbreaks, who'd supported my dreams and celebrated my achievements, had become someone I hardly recognized. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad's lawyer, Mr. Abernathy. Strange timing. I hadn't heard from him since the will was settled over a year ago. Sophie, please call me at your earliest convenience. There's a matter regarding your father's estate that requires your attention. I frowned at the message. Dad's estate had been simple. The life insurance had paid off the remaining mortgage, and everything else had gone to Mom. What could possibly require my attention now? With numb fingers, I dialed the number. Sophie, thank you for calling back promptly. Mr. Abernathy's voice carried the formal warmth I remembered from childhood visits to his office with Dad. I've been trying to reach you for a couple of days. Sorry, it's been complicated here. An understatement that nearly made me laugh despite everything. What's this about? I've been organizing old files, and I discovered something that should have been addressed during the probate process. He sounded troubled. Your father had me prepare a deed transfer for the house about 3 years ago, but it seems the executed documents were never filed with the county. Deed transfer? I echoed, confused. What kind of transfer? He placed the house in joint ownership between your mother and yourself, with right of survivorship. He paused, letting this sink in. In simple terms, you own half the house, Sophie. And if your mother were to pass away, you would become sole owner. The world seemed to stop. I own half the house? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes. The deed was fully executed, signed by both your father and mother, but for some reason it was never recorded with the county. I have the original here in your father's file. Legally, once I file this with the county clerk, the property records will reflect that you and your mother are joint owners. My mind raced, connecting dots. Mom couldn't sell the house without my signature. Couldn't take out a home equity loan without my consent. Couldn't legally evict me from property I partially owned. My mother is preparing to move her new husband in, I said slowly. She's asked me to move out, tomorrow. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. I see, Mr. Abernathy finally responded. That complicates matters. Sophie, would you like me to file this deed immediately? It could be on record by tomorrow morning. My hand tightened around the phone as I looked at the boxes containing my life, ready to be carted away to make room for Gerald and his occasional visits from his adult children. Dad had wanted to protect me, had ensured I would always have a home, regardless of what happened. Had Mom known about this deed? Had she forgotten? Or had she simply assumed it would never matter? Yes, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. File it first thing tomorrow. I'll call you. As soon as it's done, Mr. Abernathy promised. And Sophie? Your father was very clear about his wishes. This was important to him. After hanging up, I remained motionless on the bed, staring at the boxed-up remnants of my life. Tomorrow, Gerald would move in, expecting me to be gone. Tomorrow, my mother would begin her new life, having discarded the old one, and me along with it. But tomorrow, the county records would show that I owned half of this house, that I had just as much right to be here as she did. The question was, what would I do with that knowledge? Sleep eluded me that night. The persistent tick of the grandfather clock downstairs, Dad's prized antique that he'd restored the summer I turned 16, seemed to count down the hours until my supposed departure. I lay awake on my stripped mattress, surrounded by boxes containing the fragments of my life, turning options over in my mind. I could leave quietly as Mom wanted, crash on Leah's couch while scrambling to find an apartment I couldn't really afford. I could confront Mom with the deed information immediately, forcing a conversation that would inevitably turn explosive. Or I could wait until the deed was officially filed, then decide my next move from a position of legal strength. Around 3 a.m., I heard voices downstairs, Mom and Gerald, his deep rumble carrying through the old house's vents. He wasn't supposed to move in until tomorrow, but apparently he couldn't wait. Their murmured conversation grew louder as they climbed the stairs, passing my room on their way to the master bedroom. I caught fragments of their discussion. Told her today. She'll be gone by... Good. The boys need space when they... Sure. She understands. It's for the best. The door to my parents' bedroom, now just Mom's and Gerald's, I supposed, clicked shut, cutting off their voices. The casual dismissal of my existence made my chest physically ache, like someone had lodged a stone beneath my ribs. This house held everything of my father, his handprints in the renovations, his spirit in the rooms we'd decorated together, his presence in the garden he'd planned each spring. Leaving meant abandoning the last physical connection I had to him. Dawn brought the sound of a truck rumbling into our driveway. Peering through my curtains, I saw a moving van emblazoned with Peterson's Professional Movers. 2 men in uniforms emerged, followed by Gerald directing them with expansive hand gestures. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Abernathy. At the county clerk's office. Filing the deed as we speak. We'll call when it's official. A knock at my bedroom door startled me. Mom entered without waiting for a response, her face carefully composed into what I recognized as her difficult conversations expression. The same one she'd worn when telling me about Dad's cancer diagnosis. The movers are here, she said unnecessarily. They'll take your boxes to storage for now. I've paid for 3 months, which should give you plenty of time to find a place. The casual generosity, paying for storage while evicting me, felt like salt in an open wound. That's thoughtful, I replied, my voice flat. When exactly did you and Gerald decide I needed to leave? She sighed, leaning against the doorframe. Sophie, I know this feels sudden to you, but Gerald and I have been discussing our future for months. He has a large family. They need space. You're an adult with a career. It's natural for you to move on. Natural would have been a conversation, a timeline, some respect for the fact that this is my home too. The words emerged sharper than I'd intended. It's my house, she corrected, a hint of steel entering her voice. I know you're attached to it because of your father, but legally... Are you sure about that? The question slipped out before I could reconsider. Mom's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Before I could respond, Gerald appeared in the doorway behind her, his imposing frame filling the space. At 55, he was 12 years older than Mom, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. Elizabeth, the movers need to know which furniture stays and which goes. His gaze landed on me with barely concealed impatience. Good morning, Sophie. All packed, I see, smart girl. The condescension in his tone made my skin crawl. Smart girl, as if I were a trained pet who'd performed a trick correctly. Gerald, can you give us a minute? Mom asked, her tone softening in a way it never did when she spoke to me anymore. Of course, darling, but the crew charges by the hour. He squeezed her shoulder before retreating downstairs, his heavy footsteps echoing through the house. Mom turned back to me. What did you mean about the legalities? My phone vibrated again, another text from Mr. Abernathy. Deed filed and recorded. You are officially joint owner with your mother. Certificate being emailed to you now. Perfect timing. Dad left me half the house, I said quietly. The deed has both our names on it. I just found out last night. The color drained from Mom's face. That's not possible. The will... It wasn't in the will. Dad transferred ownership before he died. You signed the paperwork. I watched her carefully, trying to determine if she'd known and forgotten, or if this was genuinely news to her. Her expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked remarkably like anger. Your father had no right to do that without discussing it with me. You signed the transfer, Mom. Mr. Abernathy found the executed documents in Dad's files. He's filing them with the county clerk right now. She stepped back as if I'd physically pushed her. This is ridiculous. That paperwork must be a mistake. It's not a mistake. I own half this house. You can't legally make me leave. The words gave me no pleasure, despite the vindication they represented. Mom's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. So that's how it's going to be? You're going to use some paperwork trick to force your way into our new life? To sabotage my happiness with Gerald? The accusation stung. I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I just don't want to be homeless because your new husband doesn't want me around. Don't be so dramatic. You wouldn't be homeless. And Gerald has nothing to do with this. It was my decision. But the quick dart of her eyes toward the hallway told a different story. This had been Gerald's idea, not hers. And somehow that hurt even more. We can discuss this later, she said, her voice lowering as the sound of footsteps approached. I need to deal with the movers. There's nothing to discuss. I'm staying in my home. I straightened, finding a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. Gerald reappeared, his smile tight with annoyance. Everything okay up here? Elizabeth, the movers are waiting. We have a situation, Mom began, but I interrupted. The situation is that I'm not leaving. I own half this house. Gerald's smile froze, then slowly transformed into a smirk. That's not what the property records show. Elizabeth is the sole owner after her husband's death. Not anymore, I said, pulling up the email from Mr. Abernathy and turning my phone screen toward them. As of this morning, the county records showed joint ownership between Elizabeth Novak and Sophie Novak. You can check for yourself if you don't believe me. Gerald's face darkened as he snatched the phone from my hand, reading the legal document, with growing disbelief. Mom peered over his shoulder, her expression shifting from confrontational to shocked. This can't be right, she stammered. James never mentioned this to me. Obviously, your late husband didn't trust you completely, Gerald said coldly, handing the phone back to me with barely controlled anger. This complicates things. Mom flinched at his tone. In that small reaction, I glimpsed something troubling. A fear that hadn't been there during my father's lifetime. A hesitancy that suggested Gerald wasn't the supportive partner she'd portrayed. We'll sort this out, she told him, placing a placating hand on his arm. It's probably just a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I insisted. I've spoken directly with Dad's lawyer. The deed is valid and now officially recorded. I'm not trying to cause problems, but I have rights here. Gerald's jaw tightened as he stared me down. Everyone has a price, Sophie. What's yours? Excuse me? For your half of the house. Name your price, we'll buy you out, and you can be on your way. Problem solved. The casual assumption that I could be purchased and discarded sent a surge of anger through me. This house wasn't just property to me. It was memory. It was heritage. It was the last piece of my father I had left. It's not for sale, I said, firmly. This is my home. Gerald's expression hardened. Elizabeth, handle your daughter. I'll speak with the movers. He turned on his heel and stalked downstairs, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Mom looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger mixed with something else. Worry, fear, respect. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Gerald doesn't respond well to being challenged. And you don't respond well to standing up for yourself, apparently, I shot back, immediately regretting the harshness of my words. She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. You don't understand what it's like to be alone at my age, to start over, after losing the man you thought you'd grow old with. I lost him too, Mom. My voice broke. And now I'm losing you, and I don't understand why. For a moment, something softened in her expression. Then the sound of Gerald calling her name from downstairs seemed to reset her resolve. We'll figure this out, she said vaguely, turning to leave. But right now, I need to deal with the movers. As she walked away, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. I'd stood my ground, asserted my rights, and potentially severed what remained of my relationship with my mother in the process. But as I looked around at the walls my father had painted, the floors he'd refinished with his own hands, I knew I couldn't have done otherwise. This wasn't just about a house. It was about honoring my father's wishes, about preserving the life he'd built for us, about refusing to be erased, The next 48 hours transformed our home into a war zone of silent hostility. Gerald moved in despite the property revelation, dragging his designer furniture and modern art pieces into our craftsman-style home with stubborn determination. The aesthetic clash was jarring, his chrome and glass contaminating the warm woods and textured fabrics my father had carefully selected over decades. Mom avoided me entirely, communicating only through terse text messages despite us living under the same roof. Dinner at 7 and using the washing machine were the extent of our interactions. I caught glimpses of her whispering urgently with Gerald, their conversations abruptly ceasing whenever I entered a room. On the third morning after the confrontation, I descended the stairs to find an unfamiliar woman in a business suit sitting at our kitchen table. Mom and Gerald flanked her like sentinels, their faces set in identical expressions of stern resolve. "Sophie," Mom said with artificial brightness, "this is Diane Lewis, Gerald's attorney. A lawyer. They'd brought a lawyer into our home." The escalation made my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral as I poured myself coffee from the carafe on the counter. "Ms. Novak," the attorney began, her voice crisp and practiced. "I understand there's some confusion about the ownership of this property." "No confusion," I replied, leaning against the counter rather than joining them at the table. "I own half the house. The deed is clear." Diane smiled thinly. "Yes, we've verified the county records. However, there are concerns about how this transfer occurred. Your mother has no recollection of signing such a document." The implication hung in the air, that my father had somehow tricked or forged Mom's signature. The suggestion made heat rise to my face. "Are you accusing my father of fraud?" I asked quietly. "We're simply exploring all possibilities," Diane replied smoothly, "including undue influence or potential forgery." Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Gerald watched the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction, like a chess player who'd just revealed a clever move. "You should know," I said, setting my coffee mug down with deliberate care, "that Mr. Abernathy, Dad's lawyer, has the original signed documents in his possession. With Mom's signature and a notary seal, he's prepared to testify about their authenticity if necessary." The confidence in my voice belied the trembling in my hands. I'd spoken with Mr. Abernathy yesterday, asking precisely these questions, preparing for exactly this kind of challenge. Diane's smile never wavered. "Even valid documents can be set aside if they were executed under questionable circumstances. Your mother was likely experiencing significant emotional distress due to your father's illness. Dad executed the transfer 3 years ago," I countered. "Before his diagnosis." A flicker of surprise crossed the attorney's face before she recovered. "Nevertheless, there are several legal avenues we can pursue to resolve this situation. Partition by sale being the most straightforward." "Meaning?" "The court would order the property sold and the proceeds divided between you and your mother." "A clean break for everyone." The phrase "clean break" made bile rise in my throat. They wanted to erase my father completely, sell his life's work, and walk away with cash in hand. "I'm not interested in selling," I stated flatly. Gerald finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Don't be difficult, Sophie. You're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. This settlement would give you enough for a down payment on your own place. Something more appropriate for someone your age." The condescension in his tone made my skin crawl. "This house is appropriate for me because it's mine. My father wanted me to have it." "Your father isn't here anymore," Mom snapped, finally looking at me directly. "And this vindictive clinging to the past is exactly why Gerald and I need our own space." Her words landed like physical blows. Vindictive, clinging. As if honoring my father's memory, his wishes, his legacy was some kind of pathology to be overcome. "I'm calling my own lawyer," I said, reaching for my phone. "I think this conversation is over." Diane gathered her papers calmly. That's certainly your right. I'll send over our proposed partition filing so your counsel can review it. As she stood to leave, Gerald walked her to the door, their heads bent in quiet conversation. Mom remained at the table, her fingers tracing patterns on the wood, the same table where we'd eaten family dinners for as long as I could remember, where Dad and I had assembled jigsaw puzzles during winter storms, where I'd studied for college exams while Mom baked cookies to keep me motivated. Why are you doing this? I asked when we were alone. Why are you letting him push me out of my home? Out of your life? She looked up, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. You don't understand what it's like, Sophie. Being alone. Being invisible. You weren't alone. You had me. It's not the same. She shook her head. Gerald makes me feel alive again. Important. Desired. And that's worth throwing away your daughter? The home you built with Dad? Her eyes hardened. You're so much like him, stubborn, judgmental, always thinking you know what's best for everyone. The comparison to my father, intended as criticism, felt like an unexpected gift. Thank you, I said quietly. Mom blinked, caught off guard by my response. Before she could reply, Gerald returned, his hand coming to rest possessively on her shoulder. Diane thinks we have a strong case, he announced. Sophie, be reasonable. Fighting this will only drain your savings on legal fees and delay the inevitable. I stood my ground, though my heart raced in my chest. I've already called Mr. Abernathy. He's recommending a colleague who specializes in property disputes. Gerald's expression darkened. Your choice. But remember, your mother and I live here too. We can make this arrangement very uncomfortable if necessary. The threat wasn't subtle. They would try to force me out through attrition, making daily life so unpleasant that I'd eventually surrender. I nodded slowly, acknowledging that I understood the terms of engagement. I'll be staying with Leah for a few days, I said, the decision forming as I spoke. I need some space to think. In truth, I needed distance to strategize, to consult with lawyers without Gerald lurking around corners, to process the painful reality that my mother had become someone I hardly recognized. Mom's expression flickered with something that might have been relief. That seems wise. The casual dismissal stung more than Gerald's open hostility. I turned and climbed the stairs to my bedroom, pulling out a suitcase from under the bed. As I packed clothes for a few days' stay, my phone buzzed with a text from Leah. Any update on the house situation? I responded briefly. They brought in a lawyer. I'm coming to crash at your place for a bit after all. Her reply was immediate. Doors open. Wine is chilled. Lawyer sounds serious. You okay? I wasn't okay, not remotely, but I managed to pack methodically, selecting clothes, toiletries, and my work materials with forced calm. I slipped my father's worn leather wallet, the one item of his I'd kept after his death, into my bag as a talisman of sorts. As I descended the stairs with my suitcase, I found Mom waiting in the foyer, arms crossed defensively over her chest. You don't have to leave, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. I think I do. I set my suitcase down. Mom, what happened to us? When did we become this? She looked away, focusing on the antique mirror hanging on the wall, another of Dad's restoration projects. People change, Sophie. Priorities shift. Someday you'll understand. Dad never would have chosen someone else over you, I said softly. Never. Her head snapped back toward me, eyes suddenly bright with anger. Your father chose his work over me constantly, his projects, his endless renovations. This house meant more to him than I did half the time. The bitterness in her voice shocked me. In all the years of their marriage, I'd never heard her speak this way about Dad or their relationship. That's not true, I protested. He built all of this for you, for us. He built it for himself, she countered, to prove something to his father, to the world. I was just part of the picture he wanted to create. I stared at her, this stranger wearing my mother's face, rewriting the history of my childhood, my family, with casual cruelty. "If that's what you believe," I said finally, "then you didn't know Dad at all." I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. As my hand touched the knob, Mom spoke again, her voice softer. "Sophie." She hesitated. "This doesn't have to destroy our relationship. You could just let it go. Let the house go." I turned to look at her one last time before leaving. "You're asking me to let Dad go, to erase him like he never existed. I can't do that." "He's already gone," she said, an edge of desperation in her voice. "Nothing will bring him back." "Maybe not," I agreed, "but I can honor what he wanted, what he tried to protect." As I walked to my car, the weight of what was happening pressed down on me like a physical force. This wasn't just about property, rights anymore. It was about memory, about legacy, about refusing to allow my father's life and his wishes to be dismissed so casually. Behind me, the front door remained open, Mom's silhouette visible in the entryway. For a moment, I thought she might call out, might say something to bridge the growing chasm between us. She didn't. The door closed with a soft, final click. I started the car and pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, uncertain when, or if, I would return. But as I drove toward Leah's apartment, Dad's wallet a reassuring weight in my bag, one thing became absolutely clear. I would not surrender what he had wanted to protect. Not to Gerald's intimidation, not to a court order, and not even to my mother's inexplicable betrayal. Some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost. This was one of them. This was one of them. Leah's apartment became my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. A cramped one-bedroom where I slept on a pull-out couch and stored my belongings in neat stacks against the living room wall. Despite the space constraints, the relief of escaping, the toxic atmosphere at home was overwhelming. "So they're really going to court over this?" Leah asked one evening as we shared takeout Thai food on her tiny balcony. The setting sun painted the city skyline in shades of amber and gold, a stark contrast to the craftsman neighborhood where I'd grown up. I stabbed at my pad thai with perhaps more force than necessary. "They filed the partition action yesterday. Mr. Abernathy's colleague, Maria Suarez, is representing me. First hearing is next month." "That's insane." Leah shook her head. "I never thought your mom would go this far. Neither did I." I set down my food, appetite suddenly gone. I keep thinking this is some bizarre nightmare I'll wake up from. That the mom I knew for 24 years will suddenly reappear and Gerald will vanish like the bad dream he is. Leah reached over to squeeze my hand. "Have you talked to her at all since you left?" Radio silence except for a text asking where Dad kept the instruction manual for the furnace. I laughed without humor. 18 months he's been gone, and she never needed to know that before. Gerald probably doesn't know the difference between a furnace and a water heater. Dad would be rolling in his grave seeing that man in his house, touching his tools, sleeping in his bed. The thought made my chest ache with a familiar dull pain that never quite disappeared. I don't understand how Mom can just erase him like this. Leah considered this, twirling noodles around her fork. Maybe she's not erasing him. Maybe she's running from him. What do you mean? Grief does weird things to people. Some folks drown in memories, others try to outrun them. She gestured toward the city below. Remember when my grandmother died, and my dad suddenly moved them from the house they'd lived in for 40 years? Mom said he couldn't stand seeing Grandma's garden, her reading chair, all the places she wasn't anymore. The parallel made me uncomfortable, challenging the narrative I'd constructed about my mother's betrayal. This is different. She's not just moving on. She's trying to take away something Dad explicitly wanted me to have. I'm not defending her, Leah clarified. Just trying to understand her. There's always more going on beneath the surface, you know? My phone buzzed with an email notification from Maria Suarez. Speaking of beneath the surface, my lawyer found something interesting. I opened the email to find scanned documents attached. As I read through Maria's summary, a strange feeling settled in my stomach, a mixture of vindication and unease. What is it? Leah leaned over, trying to read the screen. Gerald has a history of this, I said slowly. 3 previous marriages, all to recently widowed women with assets, all ended within 2 years. Leah's eyes widened. He's a predator. A financial one, at least. I continued reading. Maria had her investigator dig into his background. His real estate development business is basically non-existent, a shell company with no active projects, and he has multiple liens against him for unpaid debts. Oh my God, Leah set her food aside. He's after your mom's money and the house. Looks that way. I scrolled through tax records Maria had obtained. Dad's life insurance payout, their retirement savings, the home equity. Mom is sitting on quite a nest egg, and Gerald is drowning in debt. The revelation transformed everything. This wasn't just about Gerald wanting space for his mythical children's visits or mom finding happiness after grief. This was calculated, predatory. You have to tell your mom, Leah urged. I shook my head. She won't believe me. She'll think I'm trying to sabotage her marriage. With actual evidence, people believe what they want to believe. I closed the email, suddenly exhausted. Especially people in love, or whatever she thinks she is with him. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number while at work. Need to talk to you about your mother. Important. Meet me at Riverside Coffee at 1 p.m. Linda Morrison. The name was vaguely familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. I showed the text to my boss, explaining the ongoing situation with the house. Take an extended lunch, he said, his kind eyes crinkling with concern. Family comes first, Sophie. We'll manage without you for a couple of hours. Riverside Coffee was a small cafe near the park, away from both my office and my neighborhood, neutral territory. I arrived early, securing a corner table with a view of the entrance. At precisely 1 o'clock, a well-dressed woman in her 50s entered, scanning the room until her gaze landed on me. Recognition flickered across her face as she approached. Sophie Novak, she asked, extending her hand. Linda Morrison, thank you for meeting me. The name clicked into place. She'd attended Dad's funeral, had hugged Mom with the familiarity of an old friend. You worked with my mother at the school district, I recalled as she sat down. Linda nodded, ordering a coffee from the passing server before turning her attention fully to me. For 15 years, until I retired last spring. She leaned forward, her expression grave. Sophie, I'm concerned about Elizabeth, about this situation with Gerald. My guard instantly rose. What do you know about it? More than I'd like to. Linda's mouth tightened. Gerald Harmon pursued me 6 months after my husband died. Same approach, charming, attentive, full of big promises. I almost fell for it. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He targeted you too? And at least 2 other widows from our social circle. Patricia Jensen actually married him briefly before discovering his debts and pattern of predatory behavior. Patricia Jensen, I repeated, the name triggering another funeral memory. A petite blonde woman who'd avoided Mom, keeping to the back of the reception line. Linda nodded grimly. I tried to warn your mother when I heard she was seeing him. She accused me of jealousy, cut off our friendship completely. That's why I'm contacting you directly. My mind raced, connecting dots. Gerald's lawyer mentioned a partition by sale, forcing the house to be sold so Mom can cash out her share. That's what he's after, isn't it? The money. Almost certainly. Linda sipped her coffee, her eyes never leaving mine. He isolates his targets, turns them against family and friends who might ask questions, then finds ways to access their assets. With Patricia, it was a business investment that mysteriously failed. With Diane Lowell, another widow from the school district, it was a joint account that was suddenly emptied. I sat back, struggling to process this confirmation of my worst fears. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Reported him? It's not technically illegal to be a gold digger, Linda said with grim humor. And he's careful to operate in gray areas, joint accounts his wives authorized him to use, business ventures with signed agreements. By the time they realize what's happening, they're too embarrassed to go public. Or too proud, I murmured, thinking of Mom's fierce independence, her reluctance to admit mistakes. I have Patricia's contact information if you'd like to speak with her directly, Linda offered. She might be willing to provide a statement for your lawyer. Thank you. I accepted the slip of paper she passed across the table. But I don't know if even this will convince my mother. She's changed. Linda's expression softened. Grief can make us vulnerable in ways we don't expect. Your mother is a proud woman, Sophie. Admitting she's been deceived isn't going to be easy for her, if she'll even speak to me. I tucked the contact information into my pocket. We're on opposite sides of a lawsuit now. All the more reason to try to reach her before things progress further. Linda checked her watch and gathered her purse. I should get going, but please, call Patricia. And if there's anything else, I can do. Actually, I said, an idea forming. There is one thing. That evening, armed with Linda's information and Maria's research, I drove back to the house for the first time in 2 weeks. The lawn, always meticulously maintained by Dad, and then by me after his death, was overgrown. Gerald's expensive SUV occupied the driveway space that had been mine since I'd started driving. Small changes that symbolized larger erasures. I parked on the street and approached the house with an odd mixture of familiarity and alienation. This was my home, yet I felt like an intruder as I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. Mom answered, her surprise evident as she instinctively stepped back. Sophie, I wasn't expecting you. I need to talk to you. I glanced past her into the foyer, where Dad's antique coat rack had been replaced by a sleek modern stand. It's important, and private. Gerald's not here, she said, seeming to anticipate my concern. He's at a business dinner. The phrase business dinner nearly made me laugh given what I now knew about his non-existent business, but I kept my expression neutral as I followed her into the kitchen. The changes continued here. New appliances, different curtains, Gerald's. Expensive coffee machine where Dad's reliable old model had stood for decades. Mom gestured for me to sit at the table. At least that remained the same, though now covered with an unfamiliar tablecloth. If this is about the court case, she began, her posture defensive, you should be talking to our lawyers. It's not about the case. It's about Gerald. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. Mom, he's not who you think he is. Her expression hardened instantly. If you came here to attack my husband, he targeted you, I interrupted. Just like he targeted Linda Morrison after her husband died, and Patricia Jensen, and Diane Lowell. Mom's hands, which had been fidgeting with a napkin, went still. What are you talking about? Gerald has a pattern, Mom. He finds vulnerable widows with assets, sweeps them off their feet, isolates them from friends and family, then finds ways to access their money. I've spoken with Linda. She tried to warn you months ago. Linda was jealous, Mom dismissed, but I detected a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She always had a thing for your father. She couldn't stand seeing me happy with someone else. It's not just Linda. I pulled out my phone, showing her the documentation Maria had compiled. 3 previous marriages, all to recent widows, all lasting less than 2 years. Multiple financial judgments against him, tax liens. His company exists on paper only. No employees. No actual projects. Mom's face paled as she scrolled through the evidence. These could be mistakes, coincidences. Mom, he's after the house, after Dad's life insurance money, after your retirement savings. That's why he wanted me gone. I was in the way. And when he found out I owned half the house and could block a sale, he brought in a lawyer to force the issue. She set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. You don't understand, Sophie. Gerald loves me. Maybe he does, I conceded, though I didn't believe it for a second. But that doesn't change the facts. He's drowning in debt. He needs money, your money. Our house. Mom stood abruptly, moving to the sink to pour herself a glass of water, her back to me, shoulders tense. Why are you doing this? Why can't you just let me be happy? Because I love you. Because Dad would have done anything to protect you from someone like Gerald. I rose but didn't approach her, giving her space. Talk to Patricia Jensen. Ask her what happened when she married him 3 years ago. Mom turned, her expression a battlefield of emotions, anger, doubt, fear. Get out! Mom, get out of my house, Sophie. Her voice broke on my name. I need to think. It wasn't the response I'd hoped for, but it was better than outright dismissal. The seed of doubt had been planted. Whether it would grow remained to be seen. As I walked to the door, I paused beside the hall table where family photos had once stood. Now only a modern sculpture occupied the space. Another piece of my father erased, another memory displaced. T. Deserved better than this, I said quietly. And so do you. Mom didn't respond, her silence following me out into the night as I closed the door behind me. 3 days passed with no word from Mom. I checked my phone obsessively, jumping each time it buzzed only to find work emails or texts from Leah. I'd hoped the evidence I'd presented would break through whatever spell Gerald had cast, but her silence suggested otherwise. You did what you could, Maria reassured me during our preparation meeting for the upcoming court date. Sometimes people need time to process uncomfortable truths. We sat in her compact office surrounded by legal texts and case files, reviewing our strategy for the partition hearing. The late afternoon sun slanted through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the documents spread between us. What if she never believes me? I asked, the question that had haunted me since leaving the house that night. Maria's expression softened, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine compassion. That's the hardest part of my job, Sophie. I can help clients protect their legal rights, but I can't heal family wounds. Those require different tools than what I have in my arsenal. The frank admission was both comforting and devastating. I'd been so focused on the legal battle that I'd almost lost sight of what truly mattered, my relationship with Mom, damaged perhaps beyond repair. Now, Maria continued, shifting back to lawyer mode, let's discuss what to expect at the hearing. Judge Winters is fair, but no nonsense. She'll want to see if there's any possibility of an agreement before proceeding with the partition action. And if there isn't, then she'll likely order an appraisal of the property and set a timeline for either a buyout or forced sale. The clinical description of dismantling my childhood home made my stomach twist. I can't afford to buy out Mom's half. I can barely make rent on a decent apartment. There are options we can explore, Maria began, but was interrupted by her phone buzzing. She glanced at the screen. It's Patricia Jensen. I asked her to call me directly after your meeting. My pulse quickened as Maria answered, putting the call on speaker. Ms. Jensen, thank you for calling back. I have Sophie Novak with me. Sophie. Patricia's voice was warm but tinged with concern. I've been thinking about you since we spoke. How are you holding up? I'm okay, I lied automatically. Mom didn't take the information well. I'm not surprised. Gerald has a way of turning validation into persecution. By now, he's convinced her you're the enemy. The accuracy of her assessment made me wince. Did you talk to her? I tried, Patricia sighed. She hung up on me. But I've been doing some additional digging that might help your case. Maria leaned forward. What kind of digging? Financial records from my brief marriage to Gerald. I've found a pattern of large cash withdrawals from our joint account that coincide with payments to a man named Victor Mendez. The name meant nothing to me. Who is that? A private investigator with a questionable reputation. Gerald hired him during our divorce to find leverage. Patricia's voice hardened. He specializes in fabricating evidence, text messages, emails, compromising photos, anything to discredit Gerald's opponents. A chill ran through me. You think he's doing the same to me? I'd be surprised if he wasn't. It's his standard playbook when someone threatens his plans. Maria was already making notes. Do you have documentation of these payments? Dates? Amounts? Better than that, Patricia replied. I have Mendez's sworn statement from when I threatened to report him to the licensing board. He admitted everything to avoid prosecution. The revelation felt like both a lifeline and a warning. Gerald wasn't just a manipulative gold digger. He was willing to manufacture evidence against me if necessary. The realization shifted something fundamental in my understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about stopping someone genuinely dangerous before he caused irreparable harm to my mother. After the call ended, Maria looked at me seriously. This changes our approach. We need to file for an emergency hearing based on this new evidence. If Gerald is fabricating evidence, what if we're too late? I interrupted, voicing my deepest fear. What if he's already gotten Mom to sign over assets or empty accounts? One step at a time, Maria counseled. First, we protect the house. Then we look at broader financial concerns. I nodded, trying to focus on practical next steps rather than the gnawing worry for my mother's well-being. Should I try to talk to her again? It might be better to wait until we have the emergency hearing scheduled. Coming with court backing gives your warnings more weight, I agreed reluctantly, though every instinct screamed to rush back to the house, to physically stand between my mother and the predator who had inserted himself into our lives. As I left Maria's office, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Sophie, please meet me at Glenfair Park. By the duck pond. Important. Come alone. Mom. My heart leaped. Mom almost never texted, preferring to call. And she'd never signed a text with Mom before. I had her in my contacts, so her name always appeared automatically. Something about the message felt off, but my desperation to reconnect overwhelmed my caution. Glenfair Park was halfway between Maria's office and Leah's apartment, about a 15-minute drive. The duck pond occupied a secluded corner, surrounded by willow trees and connected to the main park by a winding path, private enough for a difficult conversation. As I parked and walked toward the pond, the afternoon shadows lengthened across the grass. A few families were packing up picnic supplies, heading home for dinner, but the pond area was deserted except for a man sitting on a bench, his back to me. Not Mom, Gerald. I froze, instantly alert. He turned slightly, spotting me, and stood with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sophie, thank you for coming. Where's my mother? I demanded, keeping my distance. At home, I assume. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. I sent that text. I thought we should talk. Just the two of us. No lawyers, no drama. Every instinct told me to leave immediately, but curiosity and concern for Mom kept me rooted in place. About what? About ending this unpleasantness. He gestured to the bench. Please sit. I'm not the villain you've made me out to be. I remained standing. I've spoken with Patricia Jensen. A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed his face before smoothing into practiced sincerity. Patricia is a troubled woman with addiction issues. She blames me for problems she created herself. And Linda Morrison? And Diane Lowell? All troubled women with convenient problems? Gerald sighed dramatically. I see they've poisoned you against me completely. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could reach an agreement like reasonable adults. What kind of agreement? He smiled, sensing an opening. One that benefits everyone. Your mother is distraught over this conflict, Sophie. It's affecting her health. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. If you care about her health, maybe you should stop isolating her from everyone who loves her. One who loves her. I've done no such thing. Elizabeth makes her own choices. He moved closer, lowering his voice confidentially. Here's my proposal. I convince Elizabeth to let you stay in the house. You drop this absurd legal challenge. We all live together. As one happy family. The suggestion was so unexpected it momentarily caught me off guard. You just spent weeks trying to force me out. Now you want me to stay? I've had time to reconsider. Family is important. And it's a large house. Plenty of room for everyone. Something wasn't adding up. This sudden change of heart contradicted everything I knew about Gerald's pattern. Why the change of mind? I asked bluntly. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Your mother misses you. She's unhappy with the estrangement. I want her to be happy. So this is about Mom's happiness, not about the house itself? Of course. The house is just a structure. Family is what matters. The lie was so blatant it almost made me laugh. I remembered Patricia's warning about Victor Mendez, about fabricated evidence. Was that why Gerald wanted me back in the house? To set me up somehow? I need to think about it, I said, playing for time. Don't think too long. Gerald's affable mask slipped slightly. Elizabeth has been talking about moving anyway, starting fresh somewhere without all these painful memories. The threat was thinly veiled. Agree to his terms or risk Mom selling her share regardless of legal obstacles. I nodded noncommittally and turned to leave. One more thing, Sophie. His voice hardened. Those women you've been talking to, they're bitter, vindictive. Spreading lies could be considered defamation, something to keep in mind. I walked away without responding, my heart pounding. Only when I reached my car did I allow myself to process what had just happened. Gerald was getting desperate, changing tactics, making threats. Why? What had changed? I called Maria immediately, recounting the strange meeting. This is concerning, she said when I finished. The sudden desire to have you back in the house could be innocent. But given what we know about him, he's planning something, I concluded. But what? I'm not sure. But I don't think you should go back to that house without legal protection in place. Let me see if I can get the emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow. After hanging up, I sat in my car, watching the park empty as dusk approached. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path, a scene that triggered a sudden vivid memory of Mom and Dad doing the same. Their Sunday evening ritual, walking together as the day ended, planning the week ahead. The contrast between that loving image and the current reality, Mom isolated, manipulated, possibly in danger, made my decision clear. I couldn't wait for court processes. I needed to reach her now, tonight, before Gerald returned from the park. I drove to the house, rehearsing what I would say, how I would convince her to at least consider the evidence against Gerald. As I turned onto our street, a police car parked. In front of the house sent my heart into my throat. Pulling up behind it, I jumped out and ran to the front door, which stood partially open. Inside, I found two officers speaking with Mom in the living room. She looked up as I entered, her face pale and drawn. Sophie, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Thank God you're here. What happened? I looked between her and the officers. Are you okay? One of the officers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. Ms. Novak, we're responding to a report of possible financial elder abuse. Your mother has some concerns about her accounts. Mom's hands trembled as she held out a bank statement. It's all gone, Sophie. Everything. The life insurance money, my retirement savings, all of it. The world seemed to tilt beneath me as I took the statement. Mom's primary account, the one that had held over $400,000 from Dad's life insurance, and her pension, showed a balance of $212.76. When did you discover this? I asked, struggling to process the magnitude of the theft. This afternoon. I went to transfer money for the property taxes and couldn't access the account online. When I called the bank, they told me Gerald had withdrawn everything 3 days ago. He had authorization on the account. Her voice was hollow with shock. He's gone, Sophie. Packed a bag and disappeared right after. The timing suddenly made sense. Gerald's meeting with me at the park had been a distraction, giving him time to flee before Mom discovered the theft. His talk of living together as family had been his final manipulation, buying time for his escape. I should have listened to you, Mom whispered, tears finally spilling over. To Linda, to everyone who tried to warn me. I was so stupid. I knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in mine. You weren't stupid. You were grieving. He's done this before, Mom. He knows exactly how to manipulate vulnerable people. The female officer cleared her throat gently. We're filing a report, but I should tell you that these cases can be difficult to prosecute if there was account authorization in place. Do you have any idea where Mr. Harmon might have gone? Mom shook her head, but I remembered something Patricia had mentioned, a cabin in Montana where Gerald had taken her during their brief marriage. A secret getaway he claimed his grandfather had left him. I might, I said. Let me make a call. As the officers took down additional information from Mom, I stepped into the kitchen to call Patricia. The conversation was brief but productive. She provided the approximate location of the cabin and confirmed that Gerald had mentioned it recently on social media, posting about escaping to the mountains soon. When I returned to the living room, Mom looked up with an expression I hadn't seen since Dad's diagnosis. Lost, frightened, but with a glimmer of determination beneath the fear. They're sending officers to check Gerald's known addresses, she said. But I'm not hopeful. I sat beside her on the couch, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the theft, the broken trust between us. We'll find him, Mom. And even if we don't recover the money, we still have the house. We'll figure it out. She looked around the living room, her gaze lingering on the spaces where Dad's presence had been systematically erased. His reading chair replaced. With a modern recliner, his bookshelves removed to open up the space. I let him erase your father, she said, her voice catching. I was so desperate to stop hurting that I let him erase everything that mattered. The raw honesty broke something open between us. I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling her lean into me the way she used to lean on Dad. Not everything, I assured her. We can bring it back, together. As night fell, the officers finally left with promises to update us on their search for Gerald. Mom and I remained on the couch, the silence between us no longer hostile but thoughtful, filled with unspoken apologies and tentative forgiveness. Your father knew, didn't he? She finally said. That's why he put your name on the deed. He was protecting you, protecting us. Even then. I thought about Dad's foresight, his quiet determination to secure our future. He always said hope for the best, but plan for the worst. A ghost of a smile touched Mom's lips. Pure James, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows Dad had restored by hand the summer before his diagnosis. Tomorrow would bring police reports and bank investigations, lawyer meetings, and difficult decisions. But tonight, in the house my father had protected for both of us, something broken began the slow process of healing. 3 weeks after Gerald's disappearance, we gathered around the dining room table. The same table where Mom had folded napkins and told me to leave, where Dad had taught me trigonometry and how to balance a checkbook, where our family had celebrated. birthdays and holidays for as long as I could remember. Now it served as command central for Operation Recovery, as Leah had dubbed our efforts to rebuild in Gerald's wake. The police found his car abandoned at the Canadian border, I reported, setting down my phone after the latest update from Detective Weber. But still no sign of Gerald himself. Mom nodded, resigned rather than surprised. He's been planning this escape route for months, I'm sure, just like he planned everything else. The initial shock of Gerald's betrayal had given way to a clear-eyed assessment of what had happened. The more we learned, the more calculated his approach appeared. He had targeted Mom specifically after researching recent widows with assets, had love-bombed her with attention and validation during her most vulnerable period, had systematically isolated her from friends and family who might question his motives, and we now knew that Gerald Harmon wasn't even his real name. Gregory Havers, Maria read from the investigator's report spread before us. 3 prior identities. Before that, warrants in 2 states for fraud and financial exploitation. He's been working this scheme for at least a decade. Leah whistled low. Professional predator, who's currently holding nearly $500,000 of my retirement, savings and insurance money, Mom added, her voice steady despite the devastating loss. The initial police report had grown into a multi-state investigation, but everyone had been honest about the chances of recovering the stolen funds, slim to none. Gerald, or Gregory, had been meticulous about covering his tracks, using a network of offshore accounts to move the money within hours of withdrawing it. By the time Mom discovered the theft, the trail was already cold. The good news, Maria continued, is that the partition action has been dismissed. The court recognizes you both as legal co-owners with equal rights to the property, no forced sale. After Gerald's disappearance and the revelation of his true identity, his lawyer had quickly withdrawn from the case. The emergency hearing had been transformed into a status conference where the judge formally acknowledged our joint ownership and dismissed all pending actions. Small victories, I murmured, though it felt larger than that. Dad's foresight had preserved the one significant asset Gerald hadn't been able to touch. The house, our home, remained secure. Now we just need to figure out how to afford it, Mom said, her practical nature reasserting itself through the grief and humiliation of recent weeks. The property taxes alone. The financial reality was daunting. Without her savings and with only her modest teacher's pension, maintaining the house would be challenging. I was contributing my entire salary, but between the mortgage, taxes, utilities, and basic living expenses, we were stretched thin. We have options, Maria reminded us. A home equity line of credit could provide breathing room while you decide on a long-term plan. Mom shook her head firmly. No more debt. James and I spent 15 years paying off the original mortgage. I won't risk the house now. The determination in her voice was so reminiscent of Dad that I felt a sharp pang of recognition. She might have temporarily lost her way during the fog of grief, but the strong, principled woman who had raised me was re-emerging day by day. What about the upstairs? Leah suggested. It's practically a separate apartment with the back staircase. You could rent it out. I considered this, mentally reconfiguring the space. Dad always talked about converting the 3rd floor into a rental unit. He drew up plans but never got around to it. I remember, Mom said softly. It was on his project list for retirement. The mention of Dad's plans no longer carried the charge of pain it had in recent months. Instead, it felt like reconnecting with a shared history we'd both temporarily lost sight of. I could do it, I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. I have Dad's blueprints. I've learned enough from helping him over the years. With some contractor help for the plumbing and electrical. It would take money up front that we don't have, Mom pointed out. Actually, Leah interjected, my cousin's construction company owes me big time for designing their website. I bet they'd work out a payment plan in exchange for some additional marketing help. As we discussed logistics, I felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. a sense of possibility replacing the heavy blanket of loss that had enveloped us since Gerald's theft. We were planning again, building again, moving forward instead of remaining trapped in the aftermath of betrayal. Later that evening, after Maria and Leah had left, Mom and I sat on the back porch with cups of tea, watching fireflies dance across the yard Dad had so carefully landscaped. Gerald's modern patio furniture had been relegated to the garage, replaced by the weathered Adirondack chairs that had always occupied this space. "I've been thinking about what to do with Gerald's things," Mom said, staring into her tea. "The furniture, the artwork, all the modern pieces he insisted we needed. Sell them," I suggested. "They might not fetch what he paid, but it would help with expenses." She nodded slowly. "And then what? Go back to exactly how things were before?" The question hung between us, layered with meaning. We couldn't simply reset to before Dad's death, before Gerald's intrusion, before the painful fracturing of our relationship. Too much had changed. We had changed. "Not exactly the same," I said carefully. "But we could bring back some of Dad's pieces from storage, mix them with things that are just ours, create something new that still honors what came before." Mom's eyes glistened in the fading light. "I think James would like that." We sat in comfortable silence, the mention of Dad's name no longer a source of tension but a shared connection. The past few weeks had forced an honesty between us that had been lacking since his death. About grief, about loneliness, about the temptation to escape pain by erasing its source. "I need to tell you something, Sophie," Mom said suddenly, setting down her mug. "About the deed." I turned to her, surprised. "What about it?" "I remember signing it now." Her voice was quiet but clear. "It wasn't something James did behind my back. We discussed it extensively when you were finishing college." This revelation startled me. "You knew about the joint ownership all along?" She nodded, looking ashamed. "When Gerald started pushing to sell the house, I convinced myself I'd never agreed to it, that James must have added your name without telling me. It was easier than admitting I was betraying our plan, our promise to each other that you would always have a home here. The admission landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of understanding through my perception of recent events. Mom hadn't just been manipulated by Gerald. She had been actively fighting her own conscience, her own memories of agreements made with Dad. "Why tell me now?" I asked softly. "Because I need to stop hiding from the truth." She looked directly at me, her expression open and vulnerable in a way it hadn't been since before Dad's diagnosis. "James wasn't perfect. Our marriage wasn't perfect. But we were partners. We made decisions together, especially about you, about your future. I dishonored that when I let Gerald convince me that the past was something to be escaped rather than cherished. I reached across the space between our chairs, taking her hand. "We all did things we regret in the aftermath. I withdrew when you needed connection, focused on my own grief instead of recognizing yours. You were 23, Sophie. Barely. An adult yourself, dealing with the loss of your father. I was supposed to be the parent, the steady one. Grief doesn't follow those kinds of rules," I said, echoing something Dad used to say during the dark days of his illness. "It takes what it wants, when it wants it." Mom squeezed my hand, a small smile touching her lips. "When did you get so wise?" I had good teachers. As darkness settled over the yard, we continued talking, really talking, about everything that had happened. About Mom's overwhelming loneliness after Dad died. About my fear of moving forward with my own life while she was struggling. About Gerald's manipulative insertion into that volatile emotional landscape. "I thought I needed to erase James to survive losing him," Mom admitted. "Gerald encouraged that belief because it served his purposes. But all I did was create a different kind of pain. The pain of pretending the most important relationship of my life never existed." And now? I asked. She gazed at the garden, at the rose bushes Dad had planted for their 20th anniversary, at the stone path he'd laid by hand the summer before his diagnosis. Now I think maybe remembering is how we survive, not by forgetting, but by carrying forward what matters. The wisdom in her words resonated deeply, offering a path forward for both of us. Not erasing the past, with all its joy and pain, but integrating it into whatever came next. 2 months later, I stood in the newly renovated third-floor apartment, surveying the completed work with pride and a touch of wistfulness. Dad would have loved seeing his plans brought to life. The efficient layout, the built-in bookshelves, the dormer windows that bathed the space in natural light. "It's perfect," Mom said, joining me for the final inspection before our new tenant moved in the following week. "James would be impressed with your craftsmanship." "I had a good teacher," I replied, running my hand along the smooth finish of a door frame I'd installed myself. "And excellent blueprints to work from. The rental income would allow us to keep the house comfortably, covering property taxes and necessary maintenance while leaving enough for us to gradually rebuild our depleted savings." It wasn't the retirement Mom had planned, nor the independent adult life I had envisioned, but it felt right. A collaborative new chapter that honored what came before.